understanding that our brains are not being fed the materials that they need to operate perfectly. If you had a Ferrari or your favorite supercar, you would not drive it without putting oil in it. You would check it every weekend, I imagine. When we're in perimenopause, we don't have enough oil in our brain, and that's so simplistic, but if we can imagine it that way, the machine can't work properly or function optimally without these hormones being present.
Good morning. You're listening to Money Matters. In a recent episode, we explored how perimenopause can affect relationships, why so many men misunderstand what their partners are experiencing, and how those changes can create distance or conflict, and what couples can do to communicate better. But that conversation naturally leads to a bigger question. What is actually happening inside a woman's body during this stage of life? Today, we're going deeper into the physiology of perimenopause and midlife with Dr. Susan Hardwick-Smith, a nationally recognized OB-GYN certified menopause practitioner, author, and founder of Complete Midlife Wellness Center. Dr. Susan has spent decades helping women navigate hormone changes, sexual wellness, weight, sleep, mood, and healthy aging. So today, we're going to connect that relationship conversation to the biology behind it, and talk about what women can do to feel better, protect their long-term health, and move into midlife with more clarity and confidence. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
Now, I mentioned we did have a show recently with an author who had written a book from a men's perspective. I think he's one of the first going down that road as far as what us guys need to know about this. And so we talked about relationships. And so this is a nice companion, a follow-up on that episode. I sure appreciate you being on the show. I know you're here in Houston as well.
That's right.
I love it. Well, let's dive right into it. On that show, we focused about how perimenopause affects relationships. What's the most important physiological change partners need to understand?
Well, first, I think it might help to just explain what perimenopause is and what's happening with our hormones. So just quickly, I divide it into 3 sections, which is very simplistic, but just for your listeners. If you think about the time that women are younger and fertile, say starting at age 12 up until, let's just say, 35 to 40, and I'm using that very broadly because there's so much variation in the age in which this happens to us. During that time, for most women, our hormones are pretty regular. We're having a period every month. Our hormones are going up and down in a nice, predictable manner. And for the most part, everything's pretty okay. Now, certainly some women struggle with their cycles even when they're younger. But talking about the average patient, hormones are pretty manageable during that time for most women. So the hormones we're talking about that come from the ovaries are estradiol, that's the primary type of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And so all of those hormones are being produced in varying amounts. So they go up and down with our cycle and generally manageable. Now jump ahead to menopause. That's when all of those hormones stop being produced, and those levels can be very close to zero. Everybody knows how to diagnose that. We stop having periods, and that's a very abrupt hormone shift. The in-between those two is what we call perimenopause. So there's not a lab to diagnose it. It's a time of life in between the young and fertile and the end of hormone production where things are just going a bit wonky. Estradiol is very up and down, lots of highs and lows. Progesterone and testosterone are just slowly declining. So with that in mind, each of those hormone changes has different effects on our women's brain, on our weight, on our sleep, our mood, our memory. Every part of our body is affected. So, as your speaker mentioned last week, it primarily shows up this middle phase as a cognitive issue. So most patients recognize it with mood swings, changes in memory, snippiness, tiredness, typically something to do with our brain because these hormones are incredibly important for our neurologic function. So while those hormone changes are going on from our ovaries, the main place that we first notice it in perimenopause is in our brain, the same way that your speaker mentioned last time. Understanding that our brains are not being fed the materials that they need to operate perfectly. If you had a Ferrari or your favorite supercar, you would not drive it without putting oil in it. You would check it every weekend, I imagine. When we're in perimenopause, we don't have enough oil in our brain, and that's so simplistic, but if we can imagine it that way, the machine can't work properly or function optimally without these hormones being present, and they're coming in and out and in and out. So this is why women sometimes don't feel great, and it's very understandable. when you imagine those hormones in that way.
Love it. I think it's a great explanation. Although I'm the exception here, you're talking to one of the most frugal people on the planet. So a Ferrari, well, let's see, what can we use? Maybe a Honda or something. Anyway,
Well,
I get it. I
if
think
you
it's
had
a
a
good,
Ferrari, you would be putting oil because
yes,
you're frugal. So there you
yes, absolutely. I would keep it going for sure. Well, I love that. I think that's a great explanation. What's actually happening in a woman's body during perimenopause, and why can the experience vary so dramatically from one woman to another?
Well, I mentioned the change in those 3 hormones. That's what's happening. So we're no longer releasing an egg every month. Now, there are exceptions. Some women didn't do that even when they were younger, but let's just say the average patient releases an egg every month. If she doesn't get pregnant, she has a period and on it goes. So when we get into our 40s, often, again, age is very variable, we stop ovulating regularly. So the eggs are no longer getting that magical signal to do their thing on time every month. So ovulation becomes irregular. The hormones that are produced by the ovary start becoming very up and down and irregular. And, as I mentioned, that primarily affects our brain. Now, I do want to mention this is not something that women have to just put up with. So a lot of the conversation about perimenopause and menopause is in the context of, oh, yes, all these terrible things will happen. Your wife's going to become horrible, and let's figure out how to handle that. Well, that's an option. But these days, we have very, very safe and very good ways to treat patients so they don't have to just feel terrible and be moody and all of the things I just mentioned. We can really make those symptoms go away. So yes, untreated patients have those symptoms, but treated patients can really just slide through it with very few symptoms, if any. So my main message would be get help. You don't have to suffer. The suffering's optional. But yes, that's what we feel if we're not treated. I'm a big proponent of treating it. We don't get any extra points for suffering. And like you said, as your speaker mentioned last week, it affects the whole family. I mean, this is and work and every part of our life. So it's not just the patient. It really extends to everybody that she's connected with.
Susan, I know some people who are hearing what you're saying and they're saying that's great. There's some treatment that can be done, but they've also heard myths or things in the past, that studies that are maybe not well founded. Can you speak to a little bit about some of the stuff that people heard prior to the idea that, hey, this is something that we can treat?
Yeah, this is a very long story, and I'll just make it very short because it could take a couple hours of conversation. We're coming out of a couple of decades of complete misinformation about hormone replacement therapy. We now call it menopausal hormone therapy, but using hormones to treat symptoms of menopause and also help prolong life because these hormones do reduce the risk of the most important chronic diseases that kill us. Back in 2002, which was a long time ago, almost 25 years now, a study came out that misreported some very important data and led to decades of people being scared that taking estrogen in particular increases the risk of breast cancer, in particular, heart disease and stroke. And so those things have just remained in the community like things do. They're not true. Even the authors of that study, everybody who understands anything about science recognizes that that was not reported accurately and was based on a very unfortunate press release that came out in 2002. And we're still struggling with the ramifications of that. But actually, even that study was a very good study, biggest study ever done in this country, paid for by the NIH. It cost $1 billion with a B, showed that estrogen does not cause breast cancer. In fact, the group who took estrogen had a reduced incidence of breast cancer, and also doesn't cause heart disease or stroke either unless you take it by mouth. So kind of problem solved, doesn't cause any of those things. On the good side, it reduces the risk of heart disease by 40%, osteoporosis injuries, neurologic decline, sexual dysfunction, diabetes, weight gain, every kind of thing. So nowadays, we're really thinking of taking bioidentical hormone replacement as a health span adjuvant. It makes us live longer in a healthier state. It does not cause any other problems. So we're just coming out of that age of misinformation.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. For people who've heard that old story, there is new information out. And Susan, this is somebody who works in this space every single day. And so she's seeing that play out in real life. Thank you for sharing that. Why can hormonal changes affect mood, anxiety, sleep concentration, and even a woman's sense of identity?
Primarily because these hormones are present in every cell in our body and very highly concentrated in the brain. So back to the Ferrari analogy, and just say a human brain is about 1,000,000 times more complex than a Ferrari, but these critical hormones that help our brain to function optimally simply are not present or are being taken away in a very up and down roller coaster manner. And so it's very, very difficult for a human being to maintain emotional equanimity when these hormones are being pushed in and out of our brains at unpredictable times. And so most patients, and I certainly was one, really struggled with balance and natural things like sleeping when it's dark. We'd be wide awake in the middle of the night, kind of like when you have jet lag. Remembering things, I can't remember the name of the word because the message to go get that piece of that file in the back of our brain, it's kind of like a little old lady librarian. Instead of zipping down there, it takes longer to recall. And these are physiologic things that happen in the brain. Studies done on the brain of women who are going through these hormone changes actually show that parts of the brain physically change. There are anatomic changes in the brain. So this isn't a hysterical situation where the patient just needs to pull herself together or go to a psychologist or something. Brain is physically changing. And now all of that is reversible when the hormones are restored. But it's a very real anatomic pathology in the brain. And I use the word pathology lightly because this is a natural transition. But, we were only made to live about 50 years. And a lot of things that are natural we treat, like cancer, for example, infections. So treating things that are natural is a really good idea. That's why we live in this wonderful country.
I love the idea that when you mentioned we were only really meant to live about 50, we have this same problem as financial advisors. As longevity goes up and we get closer to 100, we have a big math problem to solve. Same thing as we live longer, we're now in a unique area. We've got new things that are available for tools and trying to get that problem to stretch longer. You shared something with us. You talked about how jet lag is one way of kind of describing how this might feel. You talked about the little old lady librarian when your brain's trying to access that information and coming back with it a little bit slower. But I think those are great ways to illustrate this point that you're making there. I'd like to pivot just a moment and talk about what weight, metabolism, and body composition often change in midlife, even when a woman has significantly changed her habits.
Metabolism does change as we get older. And so gaining weight and redistributing it so that we get more fat around the middle and lose muscle, that's something that happens actually to both men and women. So you look at the average dad bod as you get older, fat.
Yes, so I will testify.
That's also associated with age and hormone decline for men. But around midlife, women get very, very efficient at storing fat. We become resistant to the hormone insulin. So insulin tends to rise, and that's a fat-storing hormone. So our body is on a mission to get glucose and turn it into fat. So we get very, very good at that, storing fat around the middle. Now, I imagine if we were a caveman, that would have been a really good adaptation, just like bears store fat for the hibernation. Some of this is just old evolutionary biology, but we get more resistant to insulin, as I mentioned, so much better at fat storing. And what we used to do doesn't always work anymore. At the same time, we are losing muscle. That's a natural trajectory. So it's critical that we change that if we're going to live longer, as you mentioned regarding financial planning. If our plan now is to live to be 90 or 100, we can't just allow that natural loss of muscle and gain of fat to happen, or we won't make it to there. We'll get very sick and die from common diseases like heart disease, diabetes-related complications, or at least just be miserable and immobile, and nobody wants that. So we can counter all of that by shifting our nutrition, as do men have to do the same, really cutting down on sugar, getting rid of processed foods, eating a very protein-forward nutrition plan, and lifting weight. So lifting weight for women in particular is something that's quite new, but it's critical. It's the number one thing we need to do. So muscle is the organ of longevity. We can't live without it. And I just want to add the hopeful point that it's not a given scenario that this will just continue to happen. You can address it. I've done so myself. I'm an athlete. I have more muscle mass than I've ever had now in my 50s. But yeah, it took some work. I had to change some things around. So eat lots of protein, lift weights, and you'll be able to redo that natural change that's happening just as a function of getting older. And I give the same advice to men, as I do see men as well, husbands of my patients. Women are different for sure, but men experience a lot of the same thing. So some of it is appropriate for everybody.
What pops into my head when you share this with us is just mobility in general as we age. A lot of at the end of life injuries that we have to do with balance or stability and the impact of doing strength training and bringing muscle into those areas to support your joints, to support the muscle group. Huge game changer if we're trying to live longer. I love that. Very good information to share with listeners today. Now, your work has focused extensively on sexual wellness. What do women and their partners most often misunderstand about changes in desire, comfort, and intimacy during midlife?
For women, sexual function is very complex. Sexual function is complex for everyone, but for women, there's so many things that can affect our sexual desire. So saying that it's just hormones would absolutely not be accurate. There's a lot of things going on for many of us when we're in our 40s, for example. We might have kids that are getting to college age or having their own issues. We might have parents that are getting sick and dying. We might be in a job that's reaching an end point or transition. We might be in a long relationship that's struggling. There's a lot of things happening at the same time. So if our sexual desire changes, it could be any of those things. And then we already talked about not sleeping well. We're just tired. And then we don't like our body because we're getting fat. So it's like stacking up all the reasons why I might not want to have sex. Now, certainly all of those can individually be addressed, and we want to look at it as a holistic picture. But I will tell you, one of the things that is in that milieu is a drop in testosterone. So testosterone for women has been studied in multiple randomized controlled trials. Those are the ones that we think are valid, where placebo and medicine are given to a group of patients. Testosterone in the appropriate dose for women helps sex drive undeniably. So that's a very helpful intervention, as long as we're addressing all the other things too. It won't work if you are exhausted and you're really mad at your partner. So we want to work on those things as well. But testosterone is very helpful. Now, also, we can get vaginal dryness, and it can make intercourse painful. So we want to address that as well. That's a low estrogen symptom. So for women, we need a healthy mind to want to have sex, and we need a healthy vagina to make it comfortable. And another point I'll mention is men have ED, and that's very well discussed. Women have a version of that too, where the blood flow simply goes away in the middle and the feeling's gone. So blood flow to the genital area is really important and is enhanced by hormones. So there's so many things we can do to help. I encourage couples not to feel stuck. And I hear this a lot where they're just like, this is the way it is. I heard, none of my friends are having sex either. I guess we're just getting old. We're just going to sleep in separate rooms. Unless that's something that you want to do, and I honor everybody's different relationship structure. But very rarely have I found that that's really something that people want to do. Most of the time, there's a real genuine desire to have that connection back, and we can help. We can help to get it back. I am certainly not giving up. I don't think for myself and my patients mostly want to continue being sexually active until the day they die. And I hope that's possible. It certainly is possible.
You mentioned there are many different factors as far as relationship quality and all kinds of different things. But when we get to the physiology of it and the things that you shared, definitely an important thing for couples to be looking at, not settling with it. Hey, this is what's generally happening with our age group, that there are other options there. And you're seeing that day to day in your practice as you're healing people with this treatment. Let's talk a little bit about what do you wish more women understood about hormone therapy, including who may benefit and what questions they should ask their doctor.
Every woman is going to go through menopause. It's like death and taxes, right? You're not going to avoid it. So every woman is going to experience this very abrupt drop in hormones. And with very few exceptions, she's going to experience some significant symptoms when that happens. So knowing that we can't escape it, I think it's really important that women learn about it. Many women, including doctors, we're not really taught anything about this. So becoming educated so that we understand what's happening in our body and know what options we have to mitigate those symptoms. If you're a woman in your 40s, I highly recommend seeing a menopause specialist. I'm part of the organization called the Menopause Society. So if you look on their website, which is menopause.org, you can get a list of physicians who are trained in menopause, because most average OB-GYNs are not at all trained, not to accept just being brushed off. If you ask your doctor, see the doctor, and they're like, oh, you're fine, or you're too young for that, or other kind of dismissing sentences. We know when something's not right. Listen to your body. Make sure you find someone who will listen to you and really look into what's going on and offer you that full array of treatment options. And to Remember that the science, this is not my opinion, this is what science has supported for about 10 years, that menopausal hormone therapy is not only safe, but is beneficial to our health. We live longer if we take it. So we're flipping that around. We've got to get out of the old, I tell my patients, they used to think the world was flat. I mean, a couple thousand years ago, it sure looks flat. It's not, right? And also smoking's not good for you. And the suntan beds are
Yes,
not
this
good
is
for you
true.
either.
Go and figure. It took us that long to figure.
That's right. So certain things that we thought were fine are not, and vice versa. So we just got to
Right.
embrace the science. It's safe, move forward, and consider that as an option if you don't feel good. No extra points for suffering.
I love that. You shared some resources with us. So if you're driving right now, don't worry. Those are going to be listed in the podcast notes as well, the website to reach out to get more information. You mentioned this experience of women going to their maybe primary doctor or telling them, here's how I'm feeling. And maybe that doctor hadn't had any training or a little bit of training on this subject. And so they get pushed away. How disheartening could that be if you went out on a limb and you shared this with a doctor and they tell you, hey, it's not a thing, or we're not going to look at it. And you're encouraging people, listen to yourself. When you feel those things, keep going, keep asking. Asking you shall receive. So this is very, very good information for people who want to advocate for their own health and really get help there.
Well, I wasn't
You built
just
a
it. And why you said it's so important. I totally agree with you. If a woman, oftentimes, let's just say there's still a little bit of a paternalistic setup, not in my office, but when you go to see the doctor, you've got this guy wearing a white coat sitting behind a desk, and it's very much a, I'm going to tell you what to do situation. So challenging that and saying, I've got a question, or do you mind looking into this? It's very difficult. And granted, also, you're probably being given 15 minutes. So the system is not set up to give you a lot of time or to have somebody listen. So if you run into somebody who's still operating from that very paternalistic model, I would just give yourself permission to find somebody else. Maybe he delivered your babies. Maybe he took care of your whole family and your mom. Great. You did a great job. Now it's time to move on to somebody who really understands this part of life. And it might not be your own OB-GYN because, as you mentioned, we got absolutely no, if they're anything like my age, I'm in my 50s, we got no education about menopause, zero. And this does not take 15 minutes. My visits take 90 minutes. It takes an hour and a half just to get through the first series of questions. So you deserve to be listened to. And, if somebody tells you you're fine, you're not fine if you're not. So we don't want to be told there's something wrong with you or you're just crazy or all these things. It's very, very hard for patients to put themselves in that position. It's a lot to ask of someone to do that when we're very vulnerable. And it's a very vulnerable topic, like you said.
super important point there. You built a major practice and then created Complete Midlife Wellness Center. What gap in women's healthcare were you trying to solve?
So our mission statement actually addresses this. We saw a gap in women's healthcare and decided to fill it. The gap really was in the areas that we're talking about, giving patients time, having experts, which I was not. Like I said, I wasn't taught anything. In 2020, I got a whole lot of education and have made it my life's work since then. So for 6 years, I've been focusing only on this topic and spending hours on it a day, staying educated and making sure that our providers have all the right information, working with groups like the Menopause Society to help change recommendations so that other doctors can be educated. So there's a real push towards that, but the gap is still there. I mean, there's a few practices that focus on menopause, but Complete Midlife Wellness Center in Houston has 3 offices, and that's all we do. We treat women who are either beginning or even after the menopause transition. Typically, our patients are 35 to 65 or older, and we don't deliver babies or anything else. So that's all we do. So that still is a gap, but we're doing our part to fill it. And it's been a wonderful experience. So really enjoying learning more about this very untapped area in medicine. We still know a tiny bit about it, learning more and more all the time. So much research still needs to be done.
So much information there, so much resources for people. Now, the book, this is something that I wanted to start with, but I saved the best for last year. So you are working on a second book now. This book is called Create Her Aging into the Healthiest Version of Yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's finished and has a publication date of February 2nd, but we do have a pre-order link already that we can share. So Create Her really is for the audience of women who are aging, which is all of us, women in midlife who are anticipating what their second half of life is going to be like. and really taking responsibility to make decisions that are going to create the best elder version of ourselves. So when we imagine that 90-year-old that we want to be, what do I have to do now in order to get there? Like some of the things you mentioned, like weight training, eating protein, taking hormones, probably taking care of our health in all of those ways, our relationships. Now, it doesn't just happen. It doesn't happen on its own. It happens because of decisions we make now. And so it's a very hopeful book. Everybody could become the best elder version of themselves, but I'm so sad when I meet someone who's 75 and she hasn't made those decisions. And now really it's going to be very difficult to reach that goal. Not unlike your financial planning patients. If they're 75 and they haven't saved anything, you're doing the best you can with what you're given, but you're not going to be able to get to what you really wanted. So we've got to start early. And it's very much like saving money. We're saving muscle, we're saving bone, we're saving health from deteriorating in a way that we can't retrieve. So quite similar, actually, to what you do.
I love it. Now, I had somebody talk about it in this way. This was a woman who was an influencer. She was in her 70s and she was still putting out videos on YouTube. And she called it first, second, and third act. And I love that because it's the idea of entering into your second half of life or your third of life and entering into a brand new space. This book, Create Her Aging in the Healthiest Version of Yourself, sounds like a guidebook to help people through that second or third act of their life. So we don't have to do it alone. What a great resource for us there. We are getting right towards the end of the show here. What are the three most important actions a woman in her 40s and 50s can take now to improve both how she feels today and her long-term health span?
Well, the first one, if she hasn't done so, is find a partner, health physician or provider who's going to be a partner with you through this transition, who can help to educate and support you. So somebody like my providers or myself or whomever you can find who's going to walk with you through this, because it's hard to do alone. Get some blood work done. I encourage everyone at around age 40 to do a baseline full series of blood work to see where you're starting, and then make a plan in each of the buckets of health. The obvious things like nutrition, exercise, sleep, emotional wellness, and then fun and play, and dividing all of the aspects of your life and really looking at each one so that you can optimize each to get to where you want to be when you're older. Now, that might have been more than three things, but I think if we approached it that way and not from a position of kind of, ugh, I got to do all these things, like, oh my gosh, what a long list she just gave me, from a joyful place, because, hey, if I do these, I'm going to get good results. Imagine like when you invest well and you see that blossoming, it becomes something you want to do because you're seeing good results. So I'm all about having fun and enjoying my life. I don't want to do miserable things in order to live longer. These are things that are fun and enjoyable, make you feel good now, and also make you feel good as you're older, just like saving in a responsible way. Same idea.
What a great spot to stop here. Susan, just one more quick question for listeners who want to find out more about you, how to contact you, how to get a copy of the book. Where should they go?
So everything's on our main website, which is Complete Midlife Wellness Center.com. So 3 locations in Houston. We also see patients virtually. We have 12 providers. Everything about the book and my YouTube and everything lives on that website. So you can check it all out there.
We love it. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. You too.